If you've ever seen like a massive centuries-old tree toppled over after a severe storm, the first thing you probably notice isn't the broken branches.
Right, it's the roots.
Oh, exactly, the root system. You suddenly see this incredibly complex tangled web of roots just ripped out of the earth. And, looking at that massive crater, you realize that this invisible network underground was the only thing actually holding the structure up.
It's a really striking visual, honestly, because the strength of any structure, it isn't just about what you can see above ground. It's totally about the resilience of what's hidden beneath the surface.
And that is exactly how we need to think about building nations and specifically building democracies.
Yeah.
Because you can have a beautiful constitution, right? You can build a grand parliament building, hold regular elections, but without that invisible root system holding the soil together, the whole thing is just incredibly vulnerable.
It just washes away the moment a real political storm hits. And, we are seeing the reality of that vulnerability tested on the global stage right now.
We absolutely are. Because today is Saturday, May 16th, 2026. And the world is quite literally witnessing history in real time.
Yeah, it's really unprecedented.
Following the monumental collapse of Iran's Islamic Republic in early 2026, the global conversation has completely shifted. Like, we aren't just talking about how the regime finally fractured anymore.
No, the massive question in the geopolitical space now is, well, what comes next?
Exactly. How does a newly freed nation build a system that doesn't just recycle the old authoritarianism under some new flag?
Because the mechanical collapse of a state apparatus is, well, it's a structural event, but the spiritual, intellectual, and institutional birth of a new functioning nation, that's an entirely different discipline.
It requires completely different tools, and that is the core mission of today's deep dive. We are exploring the fundamental role of civil society in establishing a functional democracy.
And we're using Iran's current political transition as our real-time case study.
Right. And for you listening, we have a really robust stack of sources for today. We're pulling from academic papers on political sociology, geopolitical reports from the Middle East Forum, policy briefings from the NCRI, and some really fascinating on-the-ground analyses of digital activism.
It's a very diverse set of documents.
It is, and I need to be super clear up front.
Yeah.
Because we are looking at real-time, highly charged texts from across the political spectrum. Representing left-wing, right-wing, secular, and religious factions. Our job today isn't to pick a winner.
Absolutely not.
We are strictly impartial. Our goal is just to decode the blueprints these different factions are proposing and objectively explain the ideas in the source material so you can understand the landscape.
And that objective lens is so essential here. To understand Iran's future, or really the future of any transitional democracy, you have to look dispassionately at the mechanics of how power and ordinary people actually interact.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can even begin to understand how Iran proposes to build this new democratic structure, we have to define that root system.
Right, we have to actually conceptualize what civil society is.
And I really want to stick with that root analogy. Civil society is the space outside the formal government. It's outside the corporate market and outside your immediate family. It's like the dark matter of a nation.
Oh, I like that. The dark matter.
Yeah. It doesn't hold office, but its gravitational pull holds the entire democratic universe together.
It's the perfect framework. Because technically, civil society is defined as the space of voluntary collective action. So we're talking about non-governmental organizations, labor unions, professional associations, even just informal neighborhood networks.
Basically, anytime people get together to do something on their own.
Exactly. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about this centuries ago. He noted that these voluntary associations are literally the engines of democratic habit. They decentralize power, which prevents tyranny.
So if I'm a citizen, I'm not just sitting around waiting for the update to fix my streetlights or hoping a corporation will sponsor a solution.
Right, you're organizing with your neighbors. And those organizations perform crucial mechanical functions for a democracy. First off, they act as a watchdog.
Like tracking public spending.
Yeah, tracking spending, exposing corruption. Second, they aggregate citizen demands. Instead of 1,000 individuals shouting different complaints at a city council, a local union or advocacy group distills those voices into one clear policy request.
Which is much harder to ignore.
Exactly. But most importantly, civil society forms what sociologists call social capital.
And that is essentially the currency of trust, right?
Spot on. It is the network of trust and cooperation among ordinary people. When you work alongside someone in, say, a community garden or a PTA, You learn to negotiate. You learn to compromise and trust people outside your immediate clan.
I want you to think about your own community for a second. Think about like an environmental group trying to stop a local factory from dumping waste into a river. Imagine trying to hold that corporation accountable if absolutely no community groups existed.
It would be impossible.
It would just be you alone trying to fight a massive bureaucracy. No meetings, no newsletters, no organized protests.
And authoritarian regimes understand that isolation perfectly. That's why they fear civil society way more than they fear armed insurgency.
Wow. Right.
Oh, absolutely. And what's crucial to understand from our academic sources is the distinction between two types of solidarity. First, there's associative solidarity.
Which is what we just described, right?
Yeah.
We're working within an existing legal system.
Right. But when a regime legally blocks or criminalizes those avenues, civil society doesn't just disappear. It pivots to collective solidarity.
Okay, what did that look like?
These are transgressive, informal movements that have to actively challenge or just overturn the entire status quo just to be heard.
So if we look at Iran through that lens, if civil society is the root system that stops the soil from washing away, why did Iran's political soil keep eroding for the last century?
Well, our sources point to a really clear historical pattern. Scholar Payman Vahabzadeh terms it repressive development. It's this specific mechanism where a state aggressively modernizes its economy and infrastructure, but totally monopolizes political agency.
So they basically traded political participation for infrastructure. Like,
Right.
We'll build the dams, we'll pave the roads, and in exchange, you stay entirely out of politics.
That is the exact social contract they tried to enforce. We trace this back to the 1906 constitutional revolution in Iran, which was actually a deeply pioneering movement for a representative government in Asia.
It didn't stick.
No. In the decades following that, under the Pahlavi monarchy and later the Islamic Republic, the state decided it had to be the sole agent of modernization. So they built this massive state apparatus, but deliberately alienated the public from having any real role in deciding the nation's trajectory.
But wait, didn't the system ever try to reform itself from the inside? I mean, you can't just pave roads and expect people to ignore the fact that they have no voice forever.
They certainly tried. A really critical juncture highlighted in our texts is the late 1990s.
Oh, under Khatami.
Yes. Reformist President Mohammad Khatami attempted to launch this Islamic civil society project. It was a fascinating moment because for the first time since the '79 revolution, civil society was actually being debated publicly. Independent newspapers flourished, student groups became super active.
But let me guess, the parallel structure of the state crushed it.
Completely. It collapsed under immense structural pressure from hardline factions, and that failure proved a really foundational point in political sociology.
Which is?
That an autonomous civil society and an absolute theocratic rule are just mechanically incompatible. A theocracy claims divine authority, so it cannot tolerate a parallel space of secular, citizen-driven authority.
Right, because if you question the policy, you're questioning God.
Exactly. And because of this constant disruption allowing small openings and then violently closing them, scholar Homa Katuzian describes Iran as a short-term society.
Meaning the social capital, that network of trust, was never given the runway to mature.
Precisely. If your independent unions are constantly dismantled and their leaders imprisoned every few years, your institutional memory is just destroyed. The roots are ripped up before they can anchor.
But because those formal legal avenues were totally blocked, the Iranian people had to adapt. And the sources detail how they transformed this profound grief into a completely new mechanism of civic power.
Right, the real paradigm shift. The rupture occurred in September 2022 with the Woman, Life, Freedom movement.
Sparked by the death of Mahsa Amini.
Yes, in custody of the morality police. And the analysis agrees this wasn't just another cycle of protest. It broke what observers call the wall of fear. It fundamentally altered the psychological relationship between the state and the citizenry.
So how does a state respond when the psychological fear is just gone? Our sources detail a mechanism called containment governance. They didn't just use brute military force, right?
No, it was much more insidious. Containment governance is essentially a war of attrition against the public. The regime used selective coercion-like arresting key organizers in the middle of the night to spread paranoia.
And the digital blackouts.
Yeah, throttling the internet so activists couldn't communicate or upload footage. Their goal wasn't just to physically stop protests. They wanted to induce profound psychological and economic fatigue during the mass demonstrations of 2025 and 2026.
They wanted to make daily survival so exhausting that organizing became impossible.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Because traditional NGOs were banned, the Iranian people couldn't rely on visible organizations. So these informal, decentralized networks stepped into the void.
Which is brilliant tactically.
Yeah. The heavy lifting fell to groups that were already operating under immense daily repression. We're talking about labor syndicates like the Half-Tapa Sugar Workers.
And the teachers' unions?
Right, the Coordinating Council of Teachers' Trade Associations, plus all these digital activists.
And those decentralized networks are so much harder for a regime to dismantle because there's no single head to cut off. And the sources highlight a crucial mechanism that protected them: transnational solidarity.
Oh, this is such a vital point. Because local NGOs had no legal standing inside the country, international groups essentially adopted them. They provided a global shield.
Organizations like the American Federation of Teachers threw their institutional weight behind Iranian unionists.
Which fundamentally changes the risk calculus for the regime, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It makes it politically and diplomatically way costlier to just quietly erase local labor leaders. It forces the regime to expend diplomatic capital that they desperately need to save.
And all of this internal pressure was building to a boiling point right as the regime's external architecture started to crack. The reports show how the June 2025 Israel-Iran war served as the final catalyst.
That external shock was just devastating to the regime. The 2025 conflict severely degraded their military capabilities, but more crucially, it shattered their aura of invincibility.
The security forces were overstretched.
Overstretched and completely demoralized. And that vulnerability created the exact opening the grassroots movements needed to push the system into complete mechanical collapse by early 2026.
But, okay, moving from grassroots resistance to actual governance exposes a massive power vacuum. The regime has fallen. But as the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune piece points out, collapsing a regime is just demolition.
Right. Building the nation is the actual work.
So what does this all mean for who actually leads? Who steps into the void?
Well, this is historically the most precarious phase of any transition. When we map out the competing visions detailed in our geopolitical sources, we see profound ideological divides. And it's not just about who gets to be in charge.
It's about the shape of power itself.
Exactly, the distribution of power.
So let's look at the blueprints objectively. The most obvious tension is between centralization and decentralization. On one side, we have the constitutionalist bloc.
Yes, centered largely around Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. Their core argument is for a unified, secular, democratic Iran. They propose installing a transitional leader to manage the immediate chaos and leaving the ultimate structure monarchy or republic to a deferred referendum.
Because they argue a traumatized nation needs a unifying figurehead, right?
Yeah, to stay above the factional fray and prevent the country from fracturing.
But the sources, specifically the Real Clear World analysis, highlight intense pushback against that from the edges of the country, which brings us to the Federalist fronts.
Right. The Federalists represent the ethnic minority movements: Kurds, Baluchs, Azeris, and Arabs. They make up roughly 40% of Iran's population, and their vision is entirely bottom-up.
They want constitutional recognition of minority languages and deep regional autonomy.
Exactly. So if the constitutionalists want a strong center to hold the country together, the Federalists argue that a strong center is exactly what marginalized them for the last century.
That is the core centralist versus federalist divide.
It is. Centralists warn that federalism in a post-conflict state is just a stepping stone to civil war. But the Federalists counter that genuine democracy requires decentralization.
They think Persian-dominated centralism will just replicate the authoritarianism of the Shah and the Ayatollahs.
Right, just under a new name.
Then you have a third approach entirely. The secular democratic Republicans, mostly represented by the NCRI. And their approach seems to bypass the personality debates by focusing strictly on mechanics.
Correct. Led by Maryam Rajavi, this bloc centers its vision on a 10-point plan. They are proposing a strictly procedural transition.
So they don't want to govern indefinitely.
No, their stated objective is to organize free and fair elections for a constituent assembly within 6 months and then step aside. They mandate absolute separation of religion and state, gender equality, and a non-nuclear Iran.
basically arguing that rigid institutional procedures are the only way to prevent a new personality cult.
Exactly.
And then the wild card in all this is the fourth sphere, internal civil resistance.
The on-the-ground labor syndicates, student orgs, and women's networks, the ones who actually absorbed the regime's violence.
Right. They might not have the glossy international lobbying power, but they possess irreplaceable domestic legitimacy because they bled for this on the streets. So how does this map of competing interests compare to other historical transitions? Because looking at the Arab Spring, places like Egypt and Tunisia had these massive democratic openings that ultimately collapsed right back into authoritarian rule. How does Iran avoid that trap?
Well, the studies show the Arab Spring failed primarily due to two things: elite resistance and civil society fragmentation. In Egypt, civil society was incredibly united to remove Mubarak. But the moment he fell, the secularists, Islamists, and unions couldn't agree on a shared framework.
They couldn't transition from collective solidarity back into associative solidarity.
Precisely. And because civil society fractured along ideological lines, the old military elites exploited that division to step back in and restore order. Iran's success depends entirely on avoiding these coordination failures.
These four diverse spheres have to negotiate a workable framework, or the remnants of the old security apparatus will just exploit the chaos.
They absolutely will.
So preventing that recycling of authoritarian power requires more than just drafting a new constitution. You actually have to structurally and symbolically rewire everyday life for the average citizen.
You have to move from protest to policy. You're institutionalizing a completely new reality. Our sources highlight some really pragmatic reforms here. Like institutionally, there has to be a total secularization of the legal domain.
Because for decades, the justice system and family law were based on religious jurisprudence.
Right. The new framework has to structurally replace the concept of believers with citizens.
That distinction is so profound. A believer implies there's a correct way to think and act dictated by the state. But a citizen guarantees absolute equality before the law, regardless of faith, ethnicity, or gender.
It completely removes ideology from the administration of justice.
And there's another really tangible example of this structural rewiring in the text. It's incredibly pragmatic. The organization of time.
Oh, the weekend shift, yes.
Yeah. There are serious policy proposals to permanently shift Iran's weekend.
Because under the Islamic Republic, the weekend is Friday-centered, which aligns the economy with mandatory religious observance. The proposal is to transition to a standard Saturday-Sunday weekend.
It sounds like a minor administrative tweak, but it's massive. Physically, it synchronizes Iran's banking and trade with the global financial system. It signals they're open for business.
But symbolically, it actively decouples the state's daily administration from clerical ritual.
Yes. It proves to the citizenry, in a very quiet, everyday way, that the state is no longer managing their spiritual lives.
It's a brilliant example of how structural shifts change national psychology. But, you know, a traumatized nation needs more than just new banking hours. It needs a moral anchor.
Right.
To build this new culture, thinkers within Iran's civil society are looking backward to move forward. They are proposing a revival of the ancient Iranian civilizational triad: good thoughts, good words, good deeds.
It's incredibly elegant. It vastly predates modern political factions. It offers an ethical foundation for civic life that doesn't rely on theological coercion.
It allows the society to reclaim a shared ancient historical memory. It frames citizenship around basic ethical conduct toward your neighbors, not political purity. It's the ultimate tool for rebuilding social capital.
So what does this all mean when we pull it together? We have tracked the incredible journey of Iran's civil society. It survived as an invisible root system in the shadows. It broke the wall of fear. And it innovated through decentralized networks to emerge as the vanguard of a democratic transition.
It's a testament to human resilience.
It really is. And it underscores a fundamental truth for all of us, no matter where you are listening from.
Yeah.
Democracy is never a finished product.
It's a constant daily practice.
Whether you live in a transitioning state writing its first constitution or a republic that has existed for hundreds of years, the engine of freedom is civil society. The moment citizens stop associating, stop forming unions, stop showing up to local meetings, that is the moment the root system dies.
And when the roots die, the structure eventually falls. The maintenance of democracy requires eternal vigilance from the ground up.
It really does. And that leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to consider, inspired by the Carnegie Endowment Report on AI and Democracy in our sources.
Oh, this is a fascinating angle.
Right. We've established that a functioning civil society relies completely on shared facts and social trust. So As Iran attempts this Herculean task of building institutional trust entirely from scratch in 2026, how will the massive influx of artificial intelligence, deepfakes, and algorithmic misinformation challenge this fragile transition?
When malicious actors can synthesize audio and video, seeing is no longer believing.
Exactly. How does a traumatized society build trust in a new world when the information ecosystem itself is compromised?
It is the next great test for the resilience of civil society, not just in Iran, but globally.
Something for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends. Thanks for listening.